is the Magnate.
Hello, you're welcome to this edition of the Magnate. The Magnate is all about parading professionals from diverse backgrounds. Today, we are well endowed. We have an African in the diaspora, somebody who is well knowledgeable about the African history. And who are we talking about? The citation and its background report will situate a Magnate for the week to you. Let's bring you her citation. Yes, somebody of my gender. We are making waves globally. When we come back, it will be time to have an interactive session with our Magnate for the week. We'll be back shortly.
Dr. Sayi Rachel Titilayo Leslie is the first African or African-descended woman graduate from the Department for Semitic and Egyptian Languages and Literatures at the Catholic University of America. Then she's now studying Old Nubian, which is one of the languages of ancient and medieval Nubia. She also speaks and reads German, Amharic, and English, reads French for research, and is studying other languages for continued research on pre-colonial African history. University education. Old Nubian Studies 2022-2023, Dr. Vincent Van Gogh, PhD. Semitic and Egyptian Languages and Literatures, Catholic University of America, Washington, D.C., USA, 2019 to 2021, Master's degree. Manuscript Studies, Graduate Summer School, University of Hamburg, Germany, 2021, certificate. Amharic Immersion, studied Bengena, Harp of David and Greece Studies, 2017 at Mihor Eyusus Monastery, Gurage, established in 1904 AD, Ancient Rural Ethiopian Seminary, certificate. Religion in Africa, religion emphasis on Ethiopian Christianity, Oduifa, etc., 2012 to 2015 at Howard University, Washington, D.C., doctoral degree. Philosophy, bachelor's degree in 1995 at Northwestern University, Evanston, Illinois, United States. Professional qualifications, translator and university lecturer since 2020 to date. Consultant, African Principles of Conflict Resolution and Reconciliation and Endogenous Justice Systems for the United Kingdom Department for International Development, DFID, for the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, UNITA, and for the Economic Community for Africa, ECA, Ethiopia, from 2005 till date. Meanwhile, Dr. Sayi Rachel Titilayo Leslie still has several other awards and academic recognitions to her credit.
Welcome back. The program is The Magnate. You can see the relative first to her name and to her person. And it's a great pleasure to welcome you to The Magnate for the week, Dr. Leslie. She's based in the Americas. We ran into her while she was delivering a convocation lecture. You're welcome to The Magnate, madam.
Thank you.
So you speak a lot of languages. Are we right to call you linguists?
Yes, yes.
Okay, you talked about your mother being a Nigerian. Have you used this time to trace your roots? That is not in doubt.
Oh,
right?
well, my roots didn't really need tracing. My family ensured that I was very aware of my roots. Being half Nigerian, I'm different from, other diasporans who may not know where they come from or may have lost that information. My mother, being a scholar in her own right, was very insistent on us being very aware of who we are, and so.
Interesting.
I visited Ijebu and
oh wow,
where my family is from, the Ogundukwe family.
Wow.
My mother is from the Ogundukwe family that originates from Agoye,
yeah.
and then settled in Okeado. So most of the family actually never lived in Agoye, like
sure.
Brigadier Ogundukwe. He never really lived there. He always lived in Ibadan and Lagos.
Okay.
My mother was born in Lagos.
Okay, interesting.
And grew up in Okeado and Ibadan.
Okay, let me ask this. Did she influence your interest in African history and what you do now?
I would say definitely.
Okay.
Both of my parents. I grew up in an environment where we we were taught from early on that we are the source of civilization, and that we're the source of science and mathematics. My father was also the first black man to do a PhD for mathematics at the University of Paris.
Okay, interesting. You know, we ran into you during the convocation lecture. You were erudite in your delivery, which resonated a lot with people. Did you find it difficult to key in, to research, to knowing the fact that history has become, there's a huge gap in history in Nigeria? Did you find it difficult to key in?
There's a positive and a negative side to that.
Yeah, let's hear.
From my view. So history, and we'll talk about this more, history is fundamental for nation building, for sovereignty, for the formation of the identities of the citizens, for people to understand how they're interconnected, how they relate to each other, to the rest of Africa and the world, right? So it's essential for the formation of identities, for us to know who we are and our place in the world. Nigerians don't understand, many, I will not generalize. Although there is a trend of undervaluing history, the British never undervalued it, and they invested a lot in writing the history of Nigeria so that they could rule Nigeria.
Colonize.
So that they could rule Nigeria.
Okay.
Yes. With the intent of exploiting its resources in the colonial system. But, and with the intent of establishing what the British called, in the historical committee of the Ministry of Imperial Defense, a colonial psychology. And what is a colonial psychology? A colonial psychology is a psychology in which the colonized accept colonial rule. And not only do they accept colonial rule, they believe that they cannot rule themselves. Okay? So in order to establish this colonial psychology to facilitate effective colonial domination, even in their absence, right? Because the British are gone now, but every time when I have conversations about the future of Nigeria with Nigerian scholars, there is a habit of referring to the West for validation of anything that they do. So you see, the colonial psychology has been
ingrained.
It's been instituted, and one of the primary ways that the British established colonial psychology was one by writing the histories of all the colonies. Right? So they write all the
from their own perspective,
with the perspective of ensuring that the colonized, one, accept colonial rule and don't resist it, and two, that they cannot rule themselves, right? So what the British did was they instituted a history of Nigeria and each one of the colonies that makes it appear that the British are the heroes, right? And that there would be no, for example, I looked at some of the high school history textbooks just to see what was being taught, and it was just so interesting to me that basically students are being taught that all the ethnic groups just fight against each other, that they were all just fighting against each other. There's no focus on how peace was established or how peace was the mechanisms, the institutions, the culture of peace building. There's no reference to that. There's just you just get the impression that before the British came, Nigerian ethnic groups, which they call tribes, right? They define them as tribes. So what they've done is they've reduced Nigerian society to the lowest level anthropologically in terms of the sociological development, right? We do not have tribes in Nigeria. Okay? Yorubas were empire builders.
Interesting conversation. The thing is, this is why you have taken it upon yourself to dig deep. We'll be going for a short break now. In this break, let's give you an excerpt of her lecture.
What's very important to understand, is, especially for the youth, is that they have have an intellectual heritage and positive things in their culture that they can use to develop their society and to develop the nation and to create a more hopeful future. Questions that I got that people understood very well and they were very engaged, and I'm very impressed with the quality of questions. I would say that the university should continue doing what it's doing and continue to invite guests from the international arena to also promote women scholars and intellectuals to encourage their women students, and continue doing what Summit University is doing, make more relationships internationally and work closely with the African Historical Society.
Yeah, welcome back. It's still the Magnate. In fact, I'm thoroughly enjoying myself here, even though you are the one benefiting from this knowledge that I'm sharing. It's still Dr. Leslie here. In fact, she's Nigerian. She's Titilayo. What do you know? Have you bothered to find out the meaning of Titilayo?
Titilayo Remi means that my joy is eternal.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. Your joy is truly eternal. Okay, so how have you been able to promote this sovereignty, not only in Nigeria, maybe within the African context, so that we are proud of what we have, is not what we are told?
Well, I think that, the first thing that we need to be is, we need to do, first of all, critical analysis of what we've been taught about ourselves, and then look for primary sources. That's why I pursued the skills to be able to read manuscripts that were, written by Africans in African languages. And there's a vast store of information on our history and culture and scientific knowledge and various, mathematical knowledge that remains stored in vaults and libraries and museums, primarily in Europe and the United States, written in African languages like Giz or Classical Ethiopic, like Old Nubian, like Egyptian, and also Yoruba, that was written autographically using the Arabic alphabet and adjusted and modified Arabic script, modified ingeniously by Yorubas in order to make Arabic conform to key attributes of the Yoruba language, like tonality, etc. And so there is a vast store of information that is written in Yoruba and Hausa, using the Arabic script and modified and adjusted Arabic script in the same way that you use the Latin script now to write Yoruba. So Nigerians, young Nigerian youth are misinformed that they're using an English alphabet. They are not. The English are using a Latin alphabet.
Interesting.
As are the French and the Germans and the Yorubas are all using a Latin alphabet to write the Yoruba language. But that is just an autographic shift. There was a time when Yorubas used an adjusted and modified Arabic script to write their language. And so, Iyagba Professor Bolanle Awe, who is one of
the philosopher,
supporters of our organization, and who had honored me with giving an opening lecture at her commemoration. I was speaking with her because she's done an enormous amount of important work on oral history and oral traditions. And one of the things that I mentioned to her was that after making this discovery for myself of the vast African written resources on our history and culture, that I believe that much of what now survives as oral history may well have been written down, and vice versa, that oral history flows into written history and written history flows into oral history. I used to say a lot, all history is oral history at some point.
Sure, before documentation.
And then it's written down, right? And then another point is that, literacy in general. This is very, very important because I feel that Africans have been demoralized to a certain extent with this whole issue of using writing and not using writing. For most of human history, writing was the purview of a small minority of society, usually the priesthoods usually the priesthoods, and mass literacy is a product of the 20th century. So throughout, even in Europe during the Middle Ages, you only had maybe 3% of the population that could read, which is why the Elizabethan theater was so important.
With what you have said, do you think it's more of classically conditioning to believe that our lingua franca, which is English, is the best comparative to our own local languages?
I believe that is a product of colonialism. When you say best, what does that mean?
That's what we have made to understand.
What does that mean? What does it mean that English is the best? What does that statement actually mean?
Ultimate. The one that is superlative now. That is the accepted, as it were. Let me take you back to the question a student asked, that our own parents would rather we speak or spoke English at the home front rather than local language. That's the essence of this question.
I believe in multilingualism. So Africa has an ancient history of multilingualism. I was reading, recently about 7th, 8th century, now quarter civilizations. People spoke several languages. Before the colonial period, people tended to be multilingual, and I think it's because one of Africa's great sources of wealth are the languages. There's so many languages that are expressing so many perspectives on reality and so many perspectives on human experience, and this is an enormous source of wealth. So I don't believe in throwing away a language, right? A language is the embodiment of the historical worldview of a people, Weltanschauung, we say in German. But a language embodies a human experience through time. So each language is important. And I think that in Nigeria, English is important, yes. English is a language of trade, commerce, international communication, sharing. Yoruba is also extremely important because Yoruba is expressing the human experience through time of a people. So we get a perspective of reality, a perspective of the truth that helps us to understand what it means to be a human being.
You are Yoruba, so you promote what's yours.
Well, I would say the same about Hausa. I would say the same about Fulani.
Okay.
I would say the same that each one of these languages is expressing a historical perspective of people. So when we look at Nigeria now, we have all these languages, right? So we have all these, and all these languages have idioms that embody truths that have been observed by these various ethnic groups historically through time, right? Through their experience. Yorubas, we don't have the same experience as Fulanis, right? Fulanis have a different culture. They are pastoral. They have a pastoral culture. These are people who traverse the continent. Even today, despite the colonial borders, Fulanis traverse the continent from Nigeria to Ethiopia to Sudan. When Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed visited the late President Buhari, he was coming here because something like 6,000 Nigerian Fulanis had turned up in Ethiopia. And another 7,000 of them or so had turned up in Sudan, demanding passports and wanting to be integrated.
Nigerian.
So, this is another historical experience. Imagine what is in the Fulani language and when you think of a people who have been traversing the continent for millennia. So this is important information for scholars and scientists to have. So I believe that all of these languages are expressing truths and historical experience that enrich our knowledge of the human experience.
Interesting. What you just said is just giving credence to the global village, the one entity of the globe. But in fairness to even the federal government of Nigeria, lately there's an advocacy for most of the schools to teach in the local languages. What's your take on this?
I think that it's important to do both. I think that it's important to give students a grounding in their own culture and history, and also to be able to explain to students things in their own languages. At the same time, I think it's important to give them tools to be able to succeed internationally. So I think that multilingualism is possible. I mean, modern countries are doing it. Africans have been doing it forever. But modern countries like Switzerland, most Swiss citizens speak English, French, and German. They usually speak all three.
To be able to be relevant wherever they are.
Yeah, to function within their society.
Sure.
They speak three languages. In Canada, most people speak French and English. So I think that multilingualism is the way to go. As an educator, I taught at Addis Ababa University. And when I was at Addis Ababa University, and I speak Amharic fluently, so the language of instruction is English, but if I would notice that the students were not understanding a particular philosophical concept, I would switch to Amaringa and to Amharic and explain it to them in Amharic, and we would have discussions in Amharic that ended up enriching the classroom enormously, and they were able to, once I gave them that freedom, they were able to now pull from their own idioms, from their own, they felt comfortable now pulling from their own culture and the wisdom of their own ancestral knowledge to add to the class. And what happened as the result of that is that we were able to make contributions to Western thought by bringing in new ways of solving problems, new ways of looking at things. So I believe in multilingualism.
Okay, as we begin to round off this session, what is your counsel for Africa? I'm not sure it's peculiar to Nigeria alone, the way they removed history from our curriculum.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I think there's a positive and a negative on that. The negative is, obviously history is important. We need history to be taught in the universities without question for all of the nation building, sovereignty, identity formation reasons that we talked about. I'm not a fan of patriotism, to be honest. I'm a Pan-African. So I don't think that we need to, I would like to see a reduction in our national patriotism and more development of an African and Pan-African sense of self, because these borders were drawn with colonial interest in mind to divide us, to control Africa's wealth, to control trade routes, to do all sorts of things. So I'm happy to see more of an African identity develop.
A global village.
And not global, African identity.
African identity, okay.
African identity develop. And a Pan-African identity. I'm a Pan-Africanist, but I'm also an international person. I mean, we live in the world, people. So, yes. So now the negative thing, the positive thing about it is that it opens the door to rid ourselves of the colonial history that was written to control us and to keep us down. So when I first heard about it, I thought that's what Nigeria was doing. I thought Nigeria was saying, oh, this is propaganda. This is Western propaganda we've been teaching our youth, and we need to get rid of this colonial Western propaganda so that we can reconstruct a real history that unifies us as a nation and unifies us as a continent. So I see it, again, the positive thing is that it opens the door to rid ourselves of colonial propaganda that's being taught in the schools. The negative thing is that we need history to form the identities of our youth such that they will love each other, love the country, and go proudly and successfully forth into the world.
Interesting, Dr. Titilayo. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for obliging these chats.
Thank you for the honor.
We couldn't have come to America to have this. Thank you. We took advantage of being around as a guest of the university.
Thank you very much, and it's an enormous honor to be here at Summit University, a Muslim institution that is forward-looking and progressive, and enough to invite a woman to be their convocation lecturer, and I think that it sets an example for what Muslim institutions can do and achieve, and the role that they can play in ecumenical cooperation.
Yeah. Same thing, interfaith. Thank you so much. for coming on the program. It's been the Magnates. We have talked about the Nigerian history, the African history, and sovereignty. It's the way we do it here, week in, week out. We appreciate our guests on the program today. Let's do this same time next week when we shall bring you a revered personality on the program. Remember to follow us on our socials. You can also watch a repeat of this program on our YouTube channel. Do make it a date with us same time next week when we shall bring you another personality on the Magnate. Until then, bye for now.